The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Fort Rucker, Alabama, turning the tarmac into a shimmering mirror of heat. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the helicopter landing zone, her worn duffel bag at her feet, watching the new batch of recruits march across the field. They moved with that distinctive swagger of fresh soldiers, the kind who had just enough training to feel invincible but not enough experience to know how little they actually understood about real combat. She was 52 years old, with silver streaks running through her dark hair that she no longer bothered to dye. Her face carried the map of 2 decades in service, lines etched by sun, wind, and the weight of decisions made in split seconds at 3,000 feet. She wore simple fatigues with no medals, no insignia beyond her rank, nothing that would draw attention. That was exactly how she wanted it. Sarah had returned to Fort Rucker after 3 years of civilian life. The retirement had been nice at first. She had bought a small house in Tennessee, adopted 2 dogs, learned to bake bread from scratch. Her daughter visited on weekends with the grandkids. It was peaceful. It was comfortable. It was slowly driving her insane. The call had come 6 weeks ago. The Army needed experienced instructors for the new Advanced Helicopter Combat Program. They were facing a shortage of qualified personnel who could teach the next generation not just how to fly, but how to survive. Her former commanding officer had personally reached out, but he had been blunt on the phone. "Sarah, I need someone who's been through hell and came back with lessons worth teaching. These kids are good, but they're cocky. They need someone who can humble them without breaking them. You interested?" She had said yes before he finished the sentence. Now, standing in the Alabama heat, watching the recruits file into the briefing hangar, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and purpose settling into her bones. Not behind a kitchen counter kneading dough, but here, where the smell of jet fuel and hot metal filled the air, where every decision mattered. Inside the hangar, the temperature was marginally cooler, though not by much. Massive ceiling fans rotated slowly overhead, pushing the hot air in lazy circles. The recruits had arranged themselves in neat rows of folding chairs, about 40 of them in total. They ranged in age from early 20s to mid-30s, a mix of men and women, all of them radiating that unmistakable energy of people who believed they were about to prove something. Sarah slipped into a seat in the back row, her duffel tucked under the chair. She wanted to observe them before they knew who she was. It was an old habit from her intelligence days, always gathering information before making her presence known. The recruit sitting next to her barely glanced in her direction. He was young, maybe 24, with the kind of jawline that probably made him popular back home and the kind of confidence that suggested he had never truly failed at anything important. His name tape read, Morrison. "First day?" he asked, not really looking at her, his attention on his phone. "Something like that," Sarah replied quietly. Morrison nodded, still scrolling. "Yeah, same. This is supposed to be the elite program. Black Hawk Advanced Combat Training. Only the best get selected. Is that right?" Sarah kept her voice neutral. "Oh, yeah," Morrison continued, warming to his subject. He finally looked up from his phone, giving her a quick once-over that dismissed her almost instantly. "I graduated top of my flight class at Fort Novasil. Logged over 300 hours already. They fast-tracked me for this because of my performance metrics." Sarah made a non-committal sound. Morrison took it as encouragement. "The instructor for this program is supposed to be legendary. Guy named Blackhawk. That's his call sign. Apparently, he's got more combat missions than anyone in the current roster. Flew in Iraq, Afghanistan, some classified stuff in Africa. They say he can land a Black Hawk in conditions that would make most pilots abort." "Sounds impressive," Sarah said. "Man, I hope I get to fly with him," Morrison said, his eyes lighting up with genuine enthusiasm now. "That's the kind of experience that makes a career. Learn from the best, you know. Become the best." A female recruit in front of them turned around. Her name tape read, Jenkins. She had sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she was measuring everything and everyone around her. "You heard the rumors though, right?" Jenkins said to Morrison, her voice lower. "About Blackhawk?" "What rumors?" "They say he's difficult. Like impossible to please difficult. I heard from a guy who knew someone in his last unit that Blackhawk once failed an entire class because he said they flew like they were playing a video game instead of conducting real operations." "That's just talk," Morrison dismissed, probably exaggerated. "Military stories always get bigger in the telling." "Maybe," Jenkins said, but she didn't sound convinced. But I also heard he doesn't tolerate any mistakes. Like zero. You mess up once, and you're done. Sarah listened to them discuss this mythical Black Hawk figure, fighting the urge to smile. The legend had certainly grown in her absence. She wondered how these confident young pilots would react when they learned the truth. More recruits filtered in, filling the seats. The conversations around the hangar all carried the same themes: excitement about the program, speculation about the legendary instructor, confidence in their own abilities. Sarah heard at least 3 different people claim they were going to be the top performer in the class. The competitive energy was palpable. At exactly 1400 hours, the front door of the hangar opened and Colonel James Peterson walked in, followed by 3 other officers. The room immediately fell silent, everyone snapping to attention. Peterson was a stern-looking man in his late 50s, with a reputation for running the tightest programs in Army aviation. He walked to the podium at the front of the hangar with measured steps, his eyes scanning the assembled recruits with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen thousands of soldiers come and go. "Be seated," Peterson said, his voice carrying easily across the hangar. The recruits sat, back straight, attention focused forward. Sarah remained in her seat in the back, not moving, not drawing attention. "Welcome to the Advanced Black Hawk Combat Program," Peterson began. "You are here because someone, somewhere in your chain of command, believed you had the potential to be more than just a competent pilot. They believed you could be exceptional. Over the next 12 weeks, we're going to test that belief thoroughly." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "This program has a 30% pass rate. That means statistically, more than half of you will not complete it. You will either wash out because you can't meet the standards, or you will voluntarily withdraw because the pressure is more than you're prepared to handle. This is not meant to discourage you. It's meant to give you a realistic picture of what you're facing." Peterson clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind him. It showed a Black Hawk helicopter in flight, banking hard over mountainous terrain. "The helicopter you will be learning to master is the UH-60 Black Hawk. Many of you have flight time in this aircraft already. Some of you may even think you know it well. I'm here to tell you that you don't. Not yet. This program will teach you to fly the Black Hawk in conditions and situations you haven't imagined. Combat zones. Zero visibility. Equipment failure. Emergency extraction under fire. Medical evacuations in hostile territory. You will learn to make decisions in seconds that could mean the difference between everyone going home alive or catastrophic failure." Morrison, sitting next to Sarah, was leaning forward now, completely absorbed. Jenkins had pulled out a notebook and was taking notes. Around the hangar, the initial confidence was being tempered with the reality of what they were facing. "Your primary instructor for this program," Peterson continued, "is someone I consider to be the finest combat helicopter pilot I have ever served with." The call sign Black Hawk was earned through countless missions, through situations where failure meant death, through a level of skill and dedication that, frankly, most of you will never achieve. Sarah saw several recruits exchange glances. Morrison looked like he was about to vibrate out of his seat with anticipation. "Now, I know there have been rumors," Peterson said. "And was that a slight smile on his stern face? Speculation about who this instructor is. What I can tell you is this: every lesson you receive will be earned through real experience. Every scenario you face in training has been faced in actual combat, and every standard you will be held to is a standard that has been proven necessary to keep soldiers alive in the field." He paused again, his eyes sweeping the room. "Black Hawk will be here shortly to introduce themselves. In the meantime, I want each of you to understand something fundamental. This program is not about proving you're better than the person sitting next to you. It's not about medals or recognition or career advancement. It's about becoming the kind of pilot that other soldiers can trust with their lives. It's about excellence in service of something bigger than yourself. If that's not why you're here, you can leave now, and there will be no shame in it." Nobody moved. "Good," Peterson said. "Then let's begin with the basics. Over the next 12 weeks, you will complete 200 hours of advanced flight training, 80 hours of tactical classroom instruction, 50 hours of simulator work under combat conditions, and 20 hours of emergency procedure drills. You will learn advanced navigation, combat maneuvers, crew coordination, tactical decision-making, and how to keep your aircraft flying when everything is going wrong simultaneously. The screen behind him changed to show a training schedule that made several recruits visibly pale. The days were packed from 0500 to 2200 hours with minimal breaks and what looked like almost no time off. Your performance will be evaluated constantly, Peterson continued. Not just in the air, but on the ground. How you work with your crew, how you handle stress, how you respond to criticism, how you help your fellow recruits. We're not just training individual pilots here. We're building a cohort of leaders who will take these skills and pass them on to the next generation. Jenkins raised her hand. Peterson nodded at her. Sir, what specific qualifications does Black Hawk have? Just so we know what level of experience we're learning from. Peterson's expression softened slightly. Black Hawk has over 5,000 flight hours, including 3,000 in combat zones. Multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Participated in classified operations in 4 continents. Has trained over 200 pilots who have gone on to distinguished careers. And has more medals for valor and distinguished service than I have time to list right now. Does that answer your question? Jenkins nodded, looking slightly stunned. Around the room, Sarah could see the weight of those numbers settling on the recruits. 5,000 hours, 3 deployments, multiple continents. This wasn't just an experienced pilot. This was someone who had dedicated their entire adult life to mastering their craft. Morrison leaned over to Sarah. See? Told you. This guy is the real deal. I can't wait to meet him. Sarah just nodded, keeping her expression neutral. Peterson checked his watch. Black Hawk should be here any minute. While we wait, I want to set some ground rules. First, when your instructor speaks, you listen. No interruptions. No assumptions that you know better. I don't care if you were top of your class somewhere else. Here, you're a student. Act like it. Second, safety is paramount, in training and in the field. If you see something unsafe, you speak up immediately, regardless of rank or seniority. Third, this program is challenging, but it's not hazing. If at any point you feel like something crosses the line from demanding to abusive, you come to me directly. Clear? Yes, sir. The recruits responded, in unison. The back door of the hangar opened. Sarah stood up quietly, picking up her duffel bag. A few recruits in the back rows glanced at her, probably assuming she was leaving, maybe overwhelmed by the scope of the program. One young man gave her a sympathetic look. She walked down the side aisle of the hangar, her boots making soft sounds on the concrete floor. Peterson saw her coming, and his stern expression cracked into something that might have been a smile. Sarah reached the front of the hangar and set her duffel down next to the podium. Then she turned to face the 40 recruits, all of whom were looking at her with expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity. Recruits, Peterson said, and now he was definitely smiling. Let me introduce your primary instructor for this program. This is Chief Warrant Officer 5, Sarah Mitchell. Call sign, Black Hawk. The silence that fell over the hangar was absolute. Sarah watched as comprehension dawned on face after face. Morrison's mouth had literally fallen open. Jenkins had dropped her pen. Several recruits in the front row looked like they were trying to recalibrate their entire understanding of reality. Good afternoon, Sarah said, her voice calm and steady. I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking there's been a mistake. You're thinking that the legendary Black Hawk is supposed to be a man. You're thinking that someone my age, someone who looks like me, couldn't possibly be the person you've been hearing stories about. She let that hang in the air for a moment. You're wrong, she continued. And that assumption, that split-second judgment you just made based on what you see instead of what you know, is exactly the kind of thinking that gets people killed in combat. So let's start this program with our first lesson. Never assume you know anything about a situation until you have all the information. Clear? Yes, ma'am, came the ragged chorus of responses. Sarah walked to the podium, pulling out a worn folder from her duffel. Colonel Peterson gave you the highlight reel of my career. Let me fill in some details. I earned the call sign Black Hawk 23 years ago during my second deployment to Iraq. I was flying medical evacuations in Fallujah when we took heavy fire on approach to an extraction zone. My co-pilot was hit. My crew chief was wounded. I had to land a damaged helicopter, under fire, in a space barely large enough for the bird load, 6 wounded soldiers, and get them back to base. We made it because I didn't panic, because I trusted my training, and because I knew that those soldiers on the ground were counting on me to be better than the situation. She pulled out a photograph from the folder and held it up. It showed a younger version of herself standing next to a Black Hawk, with visible bullet holes in its fuselage. smiling despite the blood on her flight suit. "That was my third day in country on that deployment," Sarah said. "I flew for 6 more months after that, every single day. Because that's what the mission required." Morrison had his hand halfway raised. Sarah nodded at him. "Yes, recruit." "Ma'am, I apologize. I made assumptions. It won't happen again." "It will," Sarah said bluntly. "You'll make assumptions every day for the rest of your career. The key is learning to recognize when you're doing it and correcting course quickly. That's what I'm going to teach you. Not just how to fly, but how to think, how to adapt, how to survive when everything is going wrong. And the only thing standing between mission success and disaster is your ability to make the right call under pressure." She looked around the room, meeting eyes, letting them see that she meant every word. "Over the next 12 weeks, I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed. Some of you won't make it. That's not a failure on your part necessarily. Not everyone is meant for this level of work, but for those of you who do make it through, you're going to leave here with skills and confidence that will serve you for your entire career. You're going to learn from my mistakes so you don't have to make them yourselves. And you're going to understand what it truly means to be part of something bigger than yourself." Sarah picked up a tablet from the podium. "Now, let's talk about your first assignment. Tomorrow morning at 0500, you're going to report to the flight line. We're going to do a basic assessment flight. Nothing complicated. Just you, a Black Hawk, and me evaluating whether you actually know how to fly or if you've just been lucky so far." Several recruits laughed nervously. "I'm not joking," Sarah said, and the laughter died. "Luck runs out. Skill doesn't. Tomorrow, we start building skill." She dismissed them shortly after, watching as they filed out of the hangar in small groups, their voices excited and nervous. Morrison stopped by the podium on his way out. "Ma'am, I really am sorry about earlier. I shouldn't have assumed." "Recruit Morrison," Sarah interrupted gently. "You're going to make a lot of mistakes in this program. That's expected. What matters is what you do after you make them. Do you learn? Do you improve? Do you help your fellow recruits avoid the same pitfall? That's what I'll be watching for." He nodded, looking relieved, and left. She approached the podium with her notebook clutched to her chest. "Ma'am, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. How did you deal with it? Being a woman in a field dominated by men? Being underestimated constantly?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I stopped trying to prove I was as good as the men. I just focused on being the best pilot I could be, every single day. Eventually, the work spoke for itself. And the people who mattered, the people whose opinions I actually cared about, they recognized the quality of that work regardless of what I looked like." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am." After she left, Peterson came to stand beside Sarah. "That went better than I expected." "Give it a few days," Sarah said dryly. "Once they realize I wasn't exaggerating about the difficulty level, we'll see how enthusiastic they are." Peterson laughed. "That's why you're here. Break them down, build them back up stronger. That's the plan." That night, Sarah unpacked in the small apartment the Army had provided for her on base. It was basic but comfortable. She hung her few uniforms in the closet, arranged her books on the shelf, set up the coffee maker in the kitchen. The walls were bare except for one framed photograph she placed on the desk. It showed her whole crew from that deployment in Fallujah. 9 faces, all young, all smiling despite everything they had been through. 3 of them hadn't made it home. The photograph was a reminder of why she was here, why she had come back to this life after retirement. Because somewhere out there, the next generation of pilots was preparing for missions that would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. And if her experience, her mistakes, her lessons could help even one of them survive what she had survived, then every challenging moment of the next 12 weeks would be worth it. Sarah looked out the window at the flight line, where rows of Blackhawks sat waiting for tomorrow's training. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in the barracks, 40 recruits were probably second-guessing their decision to join this program, wondering if they had what it would take. Tomorrow she would start showing them the answer to that question. The alarm went off at 0430. Though Sarah had been awake for 20 minutes already, old habits died hard. She dressed in her flight suit, made a quick breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee, and headed to the flight line while the base was still mostly dark. The first rays of sunrise were just touching the horizon when the recruits began arriving. They came in clusters, some looking alert and ready, others still fighting sleep. Sarah stood next to the first Black Hawk in the line, checking her tablet and making notes as they assembled. By 0500, all 40 were present and accounted for. "Good morning," Sarah called out. "Before we get in the air, we need to talk about expectations. In combat, your pre-flight check isn't just a formality. It's the difference between coming home and not coming home. So we're going to start there. Each of you will perform a complete pre-flight inspection on your assigned aircraft. I will be watching. If you miss something, if you cut corners, if you demonstrate that you don't actually understand what you're checking for and why, you'll be doing it again and again until you get it right." She divided them into groups of 4, assigning each group to a different helicopter. Then she began her rounds, watching as they conducted their inspections. Within the first 10 minutes, she had spotted dozens of mistakes. Small things mostly, but small things that could become catastrophic failures at 3,000 feet. Morrison was checking the tail rotor on his assigned bird when Sarah walked up behind him. He ran his hand along the blade, visually inspecting for cracks or damage, then moved on to the next check on his list. "What are you looking for?" Sarah asked. Morrison turned, slightly startled. Cracks or damage to the blade, ma'am. Any signs of wear or fatigue?" "And did you find any?" "Blade looks good." Sarah reached out and ran her own hand along the same section Morrison had just checked. Her fingers found a small nick in the composite material. Barely visible, but definitely there. She held up her hand, showing Morrison the tiny fragment of material under her fingernail. "This helicopter is grounded until maintenance can evaluate and repair this damage," Sarah said. "If you had missed this and we'd taken this bird up, depending on stress factors and flight conditions, this small nick could have propagated into a crack. A crack in the tail rotor blade can lead to catastrophic failure. Catastrophic failure of the tail rotor means loss of anti-torque control. Loss of anti-torque control means the helicopter spins uncontrollably, and an uncontrollable spin at altitude means everyone aboard dies. All because you were looking but not really seeing." Morrison's face had gone pale. I'm sorry, ma'am. I should have caught that." "Yes, you should have, but you didn't. And now you know why it matters. Check the next helicopter. Do it again. Do it right this time." She moved on to the next group, where Jenkins was inspecting the main rotor assembly. The young woman was taking her time, running her hands carefully over every surface, checking every bolt and connection point. She found the loose cowling and tightened it before marking it on her inspection form. Sarah watched for several minutes and found nothing to correct. "Good work, Recruit Jenkins," Sarah said. "That's how it's done." "Thank you, ma'am." By 0700, after multiple re-inspections and corrections, Sarah finally had the recruits ready to fly. She paired them up, putting less experienced pilots with more experienced co-pilots, ensuring each crew had at least one person who seemed to have their head on straight. "Today's exercise is simple," Sarah announced. "You're going to take your bird up, fly a standard circuit around the base, and land. Basic flight operations. What I'm evaluating is your smoothness, your communication with your co-pilot and crew, your awareness of your aircraft and surroundings, and your ability to handle the helicopter under normal conditions. We'll get to the hard stuff later. Today, I just want to see what you actually know." She assigned herself to Morrison's helicopter. If the young pilot was nervous about having the legendary Black Hawk as his observer on his first flight, he hit it well. They climbed aboard, Morrison in the pilot's seat, a recruit named Davis as co-pilot, and 2 crew chiefs in the back. Sarah sat behind Morrison where she could see everything he did. The startup procedure went smoothly. Morrison ran through his checklist methodically, his hands steady on the controls. He communicated clearly with Davis, with the tower, with his crew. When he lifted off, the movement was smooth and controlled. Sarah noted it all on her tablet. They climbed to 1,000 feet and began the circuit. Morrison flew well, keeping his altitude steady, his turns coordinated, his speed appropriate. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying to show off. He was just flying, doing what he had been trained to do and doing it competently. "Recruit Morrison," Sarah said through the intercom. "I'm going to call out some scenarios. I want you to respond as if they're real. Don't overthink it. Just react based on your training. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Hydraulic pressure dropping on number 2 system. What do you do?" Morrison didn't hesitate. "Check the gauge, verify the reading. If confirmed, switch to backup hydraulic system. In from tower, we have a hydraulic issue and request priority landing." Engine fire warning light. "Identify which engine." If confirmed fire, execute engine fire emergency procedure. Close fuel valve to affected engine. Discharge fire suppression system. Prepare for single engine landing. Crew chief reports taking fire from the ground. Increase altitude if possible. Inform all crew to identify source of fire. Report to command. Assess damage to aircraft. Continue mission if able. Return to base if compromised. Sarah ran him through a dozen different scenarios, and Morrison handled each one correctly. His knowledge was solid. His responses were appropriate. He clearly understood helicopter operations at a technical level. "All right, take us back to base," Sarah said. "Standard landing, pad 3. Morrison brought the helicopter around, aligned with the landing pad, and began his descent. The approach was textbook perfect. His rate of descent was appropriate, his speed was right, his positioning was exact. 20 feet from the ground, 10 feet, 5 feet, and then they were down with barely a bump. After they shut down and climbed out, Sarah pulled Morrison aside. "That was good flying, recruit. You know your aircraft, you know your procedures. You're technically proficient." Morrison looked relieved.
"Thank you, ma'am."
But Sarah continued, "You're also flying like you're taking a test. Everything by the book. Everything exactly as you were taught. That's fine for training. But in combat, the book goes out the window sometimes. I need you to start thinking about the why behind every procedure, not just the what. When you understand why we do things a certain way, you can adapt when the situation demands it. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am. I'll work on that." Sarah spent the rest of the day flying with different crews, evaluating each pilot's abilities, identifying strengths and weaknesses. Some were excellent, some were barely adequate. 2 were dangerously overconfident and required serious attitude adjustments. By the time the sun was setting, Sarah had a clear picture of what she was working with. That evening, she called a meeting in the briefing hangar. The recruits filed in, most of them looking exhausted. Flying was physically and mentally draining, even under ideal conditions. "Overall assessment of today," Sarah began without preamble. "You're a mixed group. Some of you are farther along than others. That's expected. What concerns me is that almost all of you are operating from a place of learned procedure rather than deep understanding. You know what buttons to push and when to push them, but you don't necessarily understand the systems you're operating." She pulled up a schematic of a Black Hawk's hydraulic system on the screen behind her. "How many of you can explain to me, in detail, how this hydraulic system actually works? Not just what happens when it fails, but how it functions when everything is operating normally." 3 hands went up out of 40. "That's what I thought," Sarah said. "So here's your assignment for tonight. You're going to study this manual." She held up a thick technical manual, cover to cover. "Tomorrow morning, you're going to take a written test on helicopter systems. Not procedures, systems. How things actually work. Because when you're at altitude and something goes wrong, knowing what to do isn't enough. You need to understand why that solution works so you can troubleshoot when the standard solution doesn't apply." Groans rippled through the assembled recruits. "I know," Sarah said. "You thought this was going to be all flying and adventure. Welcome to reality. The glamorous part of being a pilot is maybe 10% of the job. The other 90% is study, preparation, maintenance, and paperwork. Get used to it." She dismissed them and watched as they trudged out, several of them already pulling out their tablets to access the digital version of the manual. Jenkins stopped on her way out. "Ma'am, can I ask how you learned all this? The technical stuff, I mean. It's not exactly the most exciting reading." "You're right, it's not. But I learned it because I crashed once, early in my career, during a training exercise. Nothing catastrophic. Nobody was hurt, but it was my fault. I had an electrical problem, and I tried to solve it using standard procedures, but I didn't actually understand the electrical system well enough to recognize that the problem was different from what I thought it was. My instructor grounded me for a week and made me rebuild an entire electrical panel from scratch, explaining every component, every connection, every function. I hated every minute of it. But I never crashed again, and more importantly, I've troubleshot dozens of electrical issues in flight because I truly understood how the system worked." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "Learn from mistakes before you make them." Exactly. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah pushed the recruits relentlessly. Every day started at 0500 with physical training, because being physically fit meant being mentally sharp when it mattered. Then classroom work on systems, tactics, emergency procedures. Then flight time, where she gradually increased the difficulty of the scenarios they faced. She took them up in bad weather, teaching them how to fly when visibility was minimal. She simulated equipment failures, forcing them to work through problems with incomplete information. She put them in high-stress situations and watched how they responded under pressure. Morrison proved to be a quick learner. After that first evaluation, he had taken Sarah's advice to heart. He started asking why, instead of just accepting what. During one simulation where his hydraulic system failed, instead of immediately switching to backup, he identified that the failure was localized and isolated that section while keeping the primary system partially operational, giving himself more options. It was creative thinking, and Sarah made sure to highlight it to the rest of the class as an example of adaptive problem-solving. Jenkins continued to be one of the strongest pilots in the cohort. She was methodical, thorough, and unflappable. Sarah had thrown every scenario she could think of at Jenkins, and the young woman handled each one with calm competence. She was also generous with helping other recruits who were struggling, spending her limited free time running study groups and practice sessions. But not everyone was thriving. A recruit named Thompson was brilliant in the classroom but fell apart under pressure in the cockpit. He knew every procedure, could recite every technical specification, but when things started going wrong during a flight, he froze. After the third simulation where Thompson's hesitation could have resulted in a crash, Sarah pulled him aside. "Recruit Thompson, talk to me. What's happening up there?" Thompson looked miserable. "I don't know, ma'am. I know what I'm supposed to do. I can see it in my head. But when I'm actually in the moment, it's like everything speeds up and I can't process fast enough." She had seen this before. Some people were natural pilots, their instincts and reactions perfectly suited to the demands of flight. Others had to build those instincts through repetition and experience. Thompson was the latter category, but that didn't mean he couldn't succeed. "How many hours have you spent in the simulator this week?" Sarah asked. "The required amount, 6 hours." "Double it. I want you in the simulator every night for the next week, running emergency scenarios over and over until your responses become automatic." Your brain is trying to think its way through problems that need to be solved instinctively. We're going to retrain your instincts. Thompson looked skeptical. "You think that will work?" "I think that's how I learned," Sarah said. "I wasn't a natural pilot either. I had to build my skills through repetition. Thousands of hours of practice until flying became as natural as walking. You can do the same, but you have to put in the work." Thompson straightened up. "Yes, ma'am, I'll do it." Sarah arranged for him to have extended simulator access and personally designed a progression of scenarios that would build his confidence gradually. She checked on him each evening, watching through the observation window as he worked through scenario after scenario, his reactions getting faster and more confident each night. On the Friday of the third week, Sarah announced a major exercise for the following Monday. "You're going to conduct a full mission simulation. Medical evacuation under combat conditions. You'll have wounded soldiers to extract, hostile forces in the area, limited time to complete the mission, and multiple potential failure points. Your performance on this exercise will count for 20% of your final grade." 20% was significant. "You'll be working in your assigned crews," Sarah continued. "4 birds, 4 crews. You'll have the weekend to prepare. Study the mission parameters, plan your approach, coordinate with your crew. This is the first time you'll be evaluated not just on individual performance, but on how well you work as a team." She distributed the mission briefings and dismissed them for the weekend. Most of the recruits immediately clustered into their crew groups, already starting to plan and strategize. Sarah spent her weekend reviewing training footage and making notes. She had a good sense now of each recruit's capabilities and limitations. This exercise would push all of them outside their comfort zones, which was exactly the point she needed, to see who would rise to the challenge and who would crack under pressure. Monday morning arrived with clouds and wind. Not ideal flying weather, but not impossible either. Sarah deliberately hadn't cancelled the exercise. In combat, you didn't get to choose your weather conditions. The 4 crews gathered on the flight line at 0600, all of them nervous but focused. Sarah briefed them one last time on the mission parameters, then sent them to their aircraft. Morrison's crew was first up. Their mission was to extract 4 wounded soldiers from a landing zone under simulated fire. Sarah flew as an observer, watching everything, saying nothing. Morrison lifted off smoothly, his co-pilot Davis handling communications while Morrison focused on flying. The crew chiefs in back were ready with medical equipment. They approached the LZ and immediately took simulated fire. Morrison reacted quickly, adjusting his approach angle to minimize exposure. He set the helicopter down exactly where he needed to, the crew chiefs jumping out to load the simulated casualties. 30 seconds on the ground, then they were up and away, Morrison flying evasive patterns to avoid the simulated threats. Back at base, Sarah reviewed the performance with Morrison's crew. "That was solid work. Your timing was good, your communication was clear, your execution was precise. Well done." Jenkins's crew went next, handling their extraction with equal competence. The third crew struggled a bit with coordination, but ultimately succeeded. Then it was Thompson's turn. Sarah watched as Thompson lifted off, his movements a bit jerky but controlled. The approach to the LZ was cautious, maybe too cautious. He sat down hard, bouncing slightly before settling. The crew loaded the casualties, but it took 45 seconds instead of 30. As they lifted off, one of the simulated threats scored a hit on their tail rotor. "Tail rotor damage," Sarah said over the intercom, introducing a new complication. "You're losing anti-torque authority." She watched Thompson's hands tighten on the controls. For a moment, she thought he was going to freeze like he had in previous simulations. But then his training kicked in. He reduced power to the main rotor to reduce torque, increased forward airspeed to improve directional stability, and communicated clearly with his crew about what was happening and what he needed them to do. The landing back at base was rough, but it was controlled. Thompson set the helicopter down hard, but kept it under control throughout. When they shut down, his hands were shaking slightly, but there was a fierce satisfaction in his eyes. "How'd I do, ma'am?" he asked as Sarah climbed out. "You kept your crew alive and completed the mission despite a major equipment failure," Sarah said. "I'd say you did just fine." That evening, Sarah gathered all the recruits for the debrief. She went through each crew's performance in detail, highlighting what they did well and where they needed improvement. Then she surprised them by showing footage from one of her own missions in Afghanistan. The video showed her Black Hawk approaching a landing zone in mountainous terrain at night. Traces lit up the sky, showing heavy fire from multiple positions. Her helicopter was already damaged, smoke trailing from the engine. She set down despite the fire, loaded the wounded soldiers, and somehow managed to coax the damaged helicopter back to base. "I'm not showing you this to brag," Sarah said as the footage ended. "I'm showing you this because I want you to understand something. That mission, which looks dramatic and heroic on video, was only possible because of thousands of hours of boring training. Every procedure I executed during that flight, I had practiced hundreds of times. Every decision I made was based on deep understanding of my aircraft systems and capabilities. The heroic moment existed because of all the unheroic moments that came before it." She looked around the room at the tired, attentive faces. "You're halfway through this program now. Some of you are exceeding expectations. Some of you are struggling. All of you are improving. Keep pushing. Keep learning. Keep supporting each other. Because the skills you're building here, the knowledge you're gaining, the confidence you're developing, all of that is going to matter when someone's life depends on you doing your job perfectly under the worst possible conditions." "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "That mission in the video, were you scared?" "Terrified. Every single second. But I was also trained, prepared, and focused on the mission. Fear is natural. Letting fear control your actions is where the problem starts. You learn to function despite the fear, not in absence of it." Jenkins spoke up. "How do you learn that?" "To function despite being afraid. The same way you learn everything else," Sarah said. "Practice. Start with small challenges and build up. Every time you successfully complete a difficult task while managing your fear and stress, you prove to yourself that you can do it. That confidence builds over time. Eventually, you trust yourself to handle whatever comes up, because you have evidence, real evidence that you can." She dismissed them shortly after, watching as they filed out in small groups, talking among themselves. They were starting to gel as a cohort, supporting each other, pushing each other. It was exactly what she wanted to see. Week 8 brought the most challenging phase of the program. Sarah had designed a series of scenarios that combined everything the recruits had learned so far with new complications that would push them beyond what they thought they were capable of handling. The morning began with an unexpected announcement. Instead of the usual briefing, Sarah had the recruits report to a different hangar where Colonel Peterson was waiting with several senior officers. "Change of plans," Peterson announced without preamble. "We've received authorization to conduct a joint training exercise with Special Forces units currently at Fort Bragg. They need extraction training. You need realistic mission experience. For the next 2 weeks, you'll be supporting actual special operations training scenarios. These are real operators running real missions just in a training environment. They're going to treat you like they're actual aviation support because that's what you might be someday. The energy in the room shifted immediately. This was no longer just advanced training. This was the real thing, or as close to it as they could get without actually deploying. Sarah stepped forward. Let me be very clear about expectations. Special Forces operators are the best at what they do. They have zero patience for incompetence, poor communication, or hesitation. They're going to push you hard because their lives, even in training, depend on precise coordination with aviation assets. If you mess up, they will let you know. If you compromise a mission, you'll hear about it. This is your chance to prove that you belong in this program. Over the next hour, she briefed them on the protocols for working with Special Forces, the communication systems they would use, the types of missions they might support, and the level of performance expected. Then she divided them into operational crews and sent them to meet their assigned teams. Morrison found himself paired with a team led by a grizzled master sergeant named Williams, who looked like he had been in combat since before Morrison was born. The first meeting was intimidating. Williams evaluated Morrison with a single glance and seemed unimpressed by what he saw. "You the pilot?" Williams asked. "Yes, Sergeant." "Recruit Morrison." "Right. Here's how this works, recruit. When we call for extraction, you come. You don't hesitate. You don't question. You come get us. We'll mark our LZ with smoke. You get in, we get on, you get us out. Simple." "Can you handle that?" Morrison straightened his shoulders. "Yes, Sergeant." "Because if you can't, if you freeze up or panic or make a mess of it, you'll get people killed. Maybe not in training, but when it's real. So let's make training as real as we can." The first mission was scheduled for the next morning. Morrison and his crew spent the evening going over every possible scenario, every potential complication. Davis, his co-pilot, was equally nervous but trying to hide it. "This is what we trained for," Davis said as they reviewed their flight plan for the 10th time. "We can do this." "We better be able to," Morrison replied. "I'm not about to embarrass myself in front of Special Forces." Jenkins, who was overhearing their conversation from the next table, leaned over. "Stop thinking about impressing them. Just focus on doing the job right. They don't care how cool you look doing it. They care that you're reliable when it matters." Morrison nodded, taking the advice to heart. Jenkins was right. This wasn't about ego. It was about mission success. The first extraction mission launched at 0:30, well before sunrise. Williams's team had inserted into a remote training area hours earlier. Their mission was to conduct a simulated raid and then call for emergency extraction under the pretense of being compromised by enemy forces. Morrison flew the Black Hawk through the darkness, relying on night vision systems and his instruments. In the back, his crew chiefs had their weapons ready, playing their part in the simulation. The radio crackled. "Black Hawk 2-7, this is Ground Team Alpha. We are compromised. Need immediate extraction. Grid coordinates following." Morrison acknowledged the call, punched in the coordinates, and adjusted his course. Beside him, Davis was already coordinating with the other helicopters in the exercise, making sure they weren't going to interfere with each other. They approached the LZ at speed, Morrison scanning for the smoke signal that would mark the pickup point. There, a plume of green smoke rising from a clearing. He brought the helicopter in fast, flaring hard to bleed off speed, setting down exactly in the marked zone. Williams's team came running from the tree line, moving with the controlled urgency of professionals under fire. They boarded in seconds, the crew chief counting them to make sure everyone was aboard. Before the last operator was fully seated, Morrison was already lifting off, keeping the helicopter low and using terrain to mask their departure. "All aboard, clean extraction," Williams reported over the intercom. There was something in his tone that might have been approval. Back at base, Williams gave Morrison's crew a brief nod. "Not bad, recruit. You fly like you're not afraid to take chances." "That's good. Just make sure they're calculated chances, not stupid ones." Morrison felt a surge of pride. Coming from Williams, "not bad" was high praise. Jenkins' mission went equally well. Thompson, who had come so far in building his confidence, had a rougher time when his team called for extraction under heavy simulated fire. He hesitated on approach, worried about the danger, and Williams's counterpart on his assigned team was less forgiving about it. "Pilot, we're taking casualties down here," the voice crackled over the radio. "Need you on the ground now." Thompson swallowed hard and pushed the helicopter forward into the simulated kill zone. His landing was rough, His timing was off, but he got the team out. The debrief afterward was brutal but fair. The team sergeant pointed out every mistake, every moment of hesitation, every second of delay that in real combat would have meant lives lost. Sarah, who had been observing from another helicopter, pulled Thompson aside after the debrief. "How are you doing?" "Honestly, man, I feel like I failed." "Did everyone survive?" "Yes, but..." "Did you complete the mission?" "Yes, but it was messy." "Most real missions are," Sarah said. "Thompson, you did fine. Not perfect, but fine. The sergeant was hard on you because he needs you to be better. Take his feedback, learn from it, and do better next time. That's all anyone can ask." Thompson nodded, looking slightly less defeated. "Next time will be better. I believe you." Over the next week, the recruits flew dozens of missions with the Special Forces teams. Each mission was different, presenting new challenges and complications. They flew in storms, at night, in zero visibility. They practiced medical evacuations, equipment deliveries, reconnaissance insertions. They learned to communicate with ground teams using minimal radio traffic, to read terrain and threats, to make split-second decisions that balanced mission requirements with safety considerations. Sarah watched her recruits transform during this period. The cocky confidence of the early weeks had been replaced by a more grounded, realistic understanding of their capabilities. They were still confident, but now that confidence was earned through proven performance rather than assumed superiority. Morrison, in particular, showed remarkable growth. He had started the program as a technically skilled pilot with an inflated ego. Now he was becoming a leader, helping other recruits through difficult scenarios, offering constructive feedback, taking responsibility not just for his own performance but for his whole crew's success. During one mission debrief, Williams actually complimented Morrison in front of the entire team. "Your pilot here is solid. Quick thinking on that last extraction when we had to change LZs mid-flight. Most pilots would have balked or delayed. He adapted on the fly and got us out clean." Morrison looked embarrassed by the praise, but also deeply satisfied. This was what he had wanted when he joined the program, but he had thought it would come from technical perfection. Instead, it came from being reliable under pressure, from being someone his team could count on. Jenkins continued to excel, her calm competence earning respect from even the most skeptical operators. During one particularly harrowing night mission where equipment failures had compromised their navigation systems, Jenkins had managed to complete the extraction using dead reckoning and visual landmarks, impressing everyone involved. Thompson had his breakthrough during Week 9. His assigned team was conducting a time-sensitive mission when they came under heavy simulated fire. The call for extraction came with casualties, meaning Thompson would need to land in a hot LZ with wounded soldiers depending on him for survival. Sarah, monitoring the exercise from the command center, held her breath as she watched Thompson's approach. For a moment, she thought he would hesitate again, but he didn't. He brought the helicopter in fast and low, set it down in the marked zone despite simulated fire from multiple directions, waited while his crew loaded the casualties, and got them out efficiently and safely. The debrief afterward was brief. The team sergeant looked at Thompson and said simply, "Good work, pilot. I'd fly with you in combat." Thompson's expression was a mixture of shock and overwhelming pride. Sarah caught his eye and gave him a small nod. He had proven to himself that he could do it, which was more important than proving it to anyone else. By week 10, the joint training exercise was winding down. The Special Forces teams were rotating out, heading back to Fort Bragg or deploying to various locations around the world. The last evening, Williams sought out Morrison. "Got a minute, recruit?" "Of course, Sergeant." Williams handed Morrison a small patch, the kind Special Forces operators wore on their uniforms. It showed a helicopter with wings, the symbol for aviation support. "That's from my team," Williams said. "We don't give these out lightly. You earned it. You and your crew. You all came in here green, and you're leaving as pilots I'd trust with my life. That means something." Morrison looked at the patch, feeling the weight of what it represented. "Thank you, Sergeant. This program, working with you and your team, it's changed how I think about everything." Williams nodded. "That's Black Hawk's doing. She has a way of showing people what they're capable of if they're willing to put in the work. Listen to her. Learn from her. That woman has forgotten more about flying helicopters than most pilots will ever know." After Williams left, Morrison found Sarah going over training reports in the operations center. "Ma'am, do you have a minute? What's on your mind?" Morrison set the patch on the desk between them. "I wanted to thank you. When I started this program, I thought I was already a good pilot. I thought I just needed the Black Hawk name on my record to validate what I already knew. But you showed me. I didn't know anything, not really. You taught me that being a good pilot isn't about technical skill or fancy maneuvers. It's about being someone your crew can trust, someone who makes good decisions under pressure, someone who puts the mission and the team above their own ego. Sarah picked up the patch, examining it. These are hard to earn. You should be proud. I am. But I'm also humbled. Working with those Special Forces teams, seeing what real professionals look like, it made me realize how far I still have to go. That's wisdom, Sarah said. The day you think you've learned everything is the day you stop improving. I've been flying for 25 years and I still learn something new on every mission. Morrison hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind since the first day. Ma'am, why did you come back? You were retired. You could have stayed retired. Why put yourself through all this again? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. Finally, she said, because this matters. Training the next generation of pilots, making sure they're prepared for what they're going to face, that's important work. More important than baking bread or tending a garden. I came back because I have knowledge and experience that can save lives, and it seemed selfish to keep that to myself just because I was comfortable in retirement. Does it ever get easier? The responsibility, I mean. No, Sarah said honestly. It gets more manageable as you gain experience and confidence, but it never gets easy. Every time you fly, you're responsible for your crew, for your mission, for the people depending on you. That weight doesn't go away. You just get stronger at carrying it. Morrison nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest with me about everything. That's my job. The final 2 weeks of the program were dedicated to advanced scenarios and final evaluations. Sarah pushed the recruits through increasingly complex missions, combining everything they had learned into comprehensive exercises that tested every skill they had developed. The weather turned severe during week 11, with storms rolling through Alabama that would normally ground all training flights. Sarah saw it as an opportunity. With proper safety precautions and careful planning, flying in bad weather was some of the best training available. She took small groups up into the storms, teaching them how to navigate when visibility was near zero, how to trust their instruments even when their instincts screamed otherwise, how to handle wind shear and turbulence and sudden downdrafts. Several recruits discovered they got airsick in rough conditions and had to work through it. Others thrived on the challenge, finding that they performed better when conditions were demanding. Jenkins proved to be exceptional in bad weather. She had a natural feel for the helicopter that allowed her to anticipate how it would respond to turbulence and wind, making tiny adjustments before they were needed. Sarah made a note to recommend Jenkins for advanced weather training after she completed the program. Thompson, surprisingly, also excelled in storms. The complexity of bad weather flying required so much focus that he didn't have time to overthink or hesitate. He just reacted, trusting his training, and his performance was outstanding. Morrison struggled at first, fighting the turbulence instead of working with it. Sarah talked him through it, teaching him to feel the helicopter, to understand its movements, to stop trying to force it to do what he wanted, and instead guide it to do what was needed. By the end of the weather training, Morrison could fly smoothly through conditions that would have terrified him weeks earlier. The final evaluation was scheduled for the last day of week 12. It would be a comprehensive mission incorporating every skill they had learned, every challenge they had faced, every lesson Sarah had tried to teach them. The mission brief was deliberately vague, requiring the crews to adapt and problem-solve in real time. The recruits gathered in the briefing hangar at 0500, all of them nervous but ready. Sarah stood at the front of the room with Colonel Peterson beside her. "This is it," Sarah began. "Everything you've learned over the past 12 weeks comes down to this final mission. You'll be conducting a multi-phase operation involving insertion, support, and extraction of a Special Forces team in hostile territory. You'll face equipment failures, weather complications, timeline changes, and unexpected threats. How you handle these challenges will determine whether you pass this program." She distributed the mission folders. "You have 2 hours to plan with your crews. Then we fly. Good luck." The next 2 hours were intense preparation. Crews huddled together, going over maps and intelligence reports, planning contingencies, rehearsing communications protocols. Sarah and Peterson moved between groups, observing but not helping. This was their test to pass or fail. At 0700, the helicopters lifted off. Morrison's crew was first in the mission sequence, responsible for inserting the Special Forces team into the operational area. As they approached the insertion point, Sarah introduced the first complication over the radio. Black Hawk 27, be advised. Primary LZ is compromised. Need alternate insertion point within 5 minutes. Morrison didn't panic. He consulted quickly with Davis. They identified an alternate location from their planning session, adjusted their flight path, and inserted the team only 90 seconds behind schedule. Clean, professional, exactly what Sarah wanted to see. Jenkins's crew handled the support phase, maintaining a patrol pattern while the ground team conducted their simulated mission. When Sarah threw multiple equipment failures at them simultaneously, Jenkins prioritized the critical systems, managed the non-critical failures, and kept the helicopter operational and mission capable. Thompson's crew had the extraction, and Sarah saved her most challenging scenario for them. As they approached the pickup point, she simulated catastrophic engine failure, forcing Thompson to make an emergency auto-rotation landing in rough terrain near the actual LZ. Thompson executed the emergency landing flawlessly. His crew jumped out to secure the area, and when the simulated ground team arrived under fire, Thompson managed to get everyone aboard and his damaged helicopter back into the air using just enough power from the failing engine to clear the immediate danger zone before setting down again for a controlled crash landing in a safer location. It was textbook emergency response, the kind of flying that separated good pilots from exceptional ones. Sarah watched it all from her chase helicopter and felt a fierce pride in how far Thompson had come. The mission concluded with all crews back at base, all simulated objectives achieved, all personnel safe despite the numerous complications and failures Sarah had thrown at them. During the debrief, she went through each crew's performance in detail, highlighting successes and noting areas for continued improvement. Overall, Sarah concluded, you performed at the level I expect from graduates of this program. You worked as teams. You adapted to changing conditions. You made good decisions under pressure. You took care of each other and your crews. Most importantly, you demonstrated that you understand what it means to be a professional military aviator. She paused, looking around the room at the tired, proud faces. 12 weeks ago, most of you walked in here thinking you were already good pilots. Some of you were arrogant. Some were overconfident. Some were unsure of yourselves. You all had something to learn, something to prove, or something to overcome. Looking at you now, I see a group of aviators I would trust to have my back in combat. That's the highest compliment I can give you. Colonel Peterson stood up. Effective immediately, all 40 recruits in this cohort are hereby graduated from the Advanced Black Hawk Combat Program. Congratulations. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Recruits hugged each other, shook hands, celebrated the achievement of completing one of the toughest training programs in Army aviation. Sarah watched them with satisfaction, knowing that she had done her job well. Later that evening, there was an informal graduation ceremony, where Peterson presented each recruit with their program completion certificate and the coveted Black Hawk patch that marked them as graduates of Sarah's program. When it was Morrison's turn, Peterson added an additional commendation for leadership and crew excellence. Jenkins received recognition for outstanding performance under adverse conditions. Thompson received a special mention for most improved pilot in the cohort. After the ceremony, the recruits gathered around Sarah, wanting photos and autographs, thanking her for pushing them, for teaching them, for believing in them even when they struggled. Morrison spoke for the group. Ma'am, we all wanted to thank you. We came here expecting to learn advanced flight techniques. We learned that, but we also learned about leadership, about resilience, about what it really means to serve. You could have just gone through the motions with us, checked the boxes, moved us through the program. Instead, you invested in us. You shared your experience, your knowledge, your time. That made all the difference. Sarah looked at the faces around her. These pilots who had started as cocky recruits and had become skilled professionals. You did the hard work. I just pointed you in the right direction. The question now is what you do with what you've learned. You're going to go to units all over the Army. You're going to fly real missions with real consequences. Remember what you learned here. Take care of your crews. Make good decisions. Stay humble enough to keep learning. And when you eventually become instructors yourselves, pass on what you know to the next generation. That's how we build excellence in this profession. Jenkins stepped forward. Ma'am, there's something we'd like to give you. She handed Sarah a framed photograph. It showed all 40 recruits standing in formation in front of a Black Hawk helicopter, with Sarah in the center. Under the photo was a plaque that read, Black Hawk Advanced Combat Program, Cohort 226. Thank you for teaching us to fly, and to be better than we thought we could be. Sarah felt unexpected emotion welling up. She had trained hundreds of pilots over her career, but this program, felt special. Maybe because it was her first time back since retirement. Maybe because they had all grown so much. Maybe just because they reminded her why she loved this work. Thank you, she said, her voice a bit rougher than usual. I'll treasure this. The party continued late into the evening, but Sarah eventually slipped away, walking back to her apartment across the quiet base. The Georgia night was warm and filled with the sounds of crickets. Overhead, she could hear helicopters on night training flights, their rotors beating rhythmically against the darkness. She thought about the past 12 weeks, about the challenges and successes, about the recruits who had become pilots worthy of the title. She thought about Morrison's growth from arrogant to confident, Thompson's journey from hesitant to capable, Jenkins's steady excellence throughout. Most of all, she thought about why she had come back to this life after retirement. It wasn't just about teaching flight skills or emergency procedures. It was about passing on something more fundamental, the understanding that excellence in any field comes from dedication, humility, continuous learning, and genuine care for the people you serve with. Her phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Peterson. Outstanding work with this cohort. I've already had 3 units requesting graduates from your program specifically. You planning to stick around for another class? Sarah looked at the message for a long moment, then typed her reply. Absolutely. When do we start? Because that was the thing about this work, about this life. It mattered. These young pilots would go on to fly missions that saved lives, supported critical operations, made differences in ways large and small. And knowing that she had played a part in preparing them for that responsibility, that made everything worthwhile. She set the framed photograph on her desk next to the old picture from Fallujah. 2 different chapters of the same story. The young pilot who had earned the call sign Black Hawk through fire and determination, and the experienced instructor who was ensuring that call sign meant something beyond just her own achievements. The next morning, Sarah was back on the flight line at 0500, watching a new batch of recruits arrive for the next program cycle. They walked with that familiar swagger of people who thought they were already good pilots. She smiled, remembering how her last cohort had looked on their first day. They would learn. She would make sure of it, because that was her mission now, her purpose. Not flying combat missions anymore, but preparing the next generation to fly them. Not earning glory for herself, but ensuring that the standards of excellence she had dedicated her life to would continue long after she was gone. One of the new recruits, a young woman who couldn't be more than 23, approached her tentatively. Excuse me, are you the instructor for this program? Sarah extended her hand. I am, Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Mitchell. The recruit's eyes widened. Wait, you're Black Hawk? I thought... She trailed off, embarrassed. You thought I'd be a man, Sarah finished gently. You're not the first to think that, and you won't be the last. The question is whether you're willing to learn from someone who might not look like what you expected. The recruit straightened her shoulders, meeting Sarah's eyes directly. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Good, Sarah said. Then let's get started. We have a lot of work to do. And as the sun rose over Fort Rucker, painting the helicopters in golden light, Sarah Mitchell walked toward the briefing hangar with her new class following behind her, ready to begin another 12 weeks of transforming recruits into pilots who would be worthy of the Black Hawk name.